Karen called SWAT on me for feeding my horses hay at 5:47 a.m. She had no idea who she was messing with. She had just called them on the future police chief. This was the same woman who fined a neighbor $500 for parking his RV on his own property and forced another family to repaint their house because the beige wasn't the right shade. Karen Mitchell had been using the HOA as her personal tool of terror for the entire neighborhood for 6 years straight. But this time, she picked the wrong target. I don't just know the law, I spent my entire career defending justice. And now, I was ready to show Karen exactly what happens when someone with real power decides to teach a lesson. Meet Sarah Chen, 52 years old, recently retired police captain from Chicago. After 25 years on the force dealing with everything from gang violence to white-collar crime, she thought she had found her slice of paradise in Willowbrook Estates, 2 acres of rolling pasture backing up to the state forest, perfect for the horses that kept her sane after her husband passed away from cancer 3 years ago. Sarah had paid $340,000 for this corner property specifically for the space and privacy. In the mornings, the mist would drift across her pasture like something out of a painting, and the soft nickering of her horses at dawn was better than any meditation app. She already had a small stable, but what she really needed was a proper barn for winter hay storage and shelter during storms. The smell of fresh sawdust and the rhythmic hammering of construction had become her new morning soundtrack. Everything was going according to plan, until Karen Mitchell arrived. Karen had been HOA president for 6 years, and she ran that association like it was her personal kingdom. She would measure grass height with an actual ruler and time people's sprinklers to ensure they were obeying the water conservation rules she had invented. She lived in a $580,000 McMansion with perfectly manicured everything, and in just the past 2 years, she had forced 4 families to move away with her constant harassment. Sarah had done everything by the book. She submitted her barn construction application, got county approval, and ensured that all setback requirements were met. The paperwork was flawless, the permits were posted, and construction was humming along beautifully. That's when Karen came clicking down the gravel driveway in her designer heels, clipboard in hand, looking like she had just smelled something particularly offensive. "That's going to destroy our property values," Karen announced, skipping any pleasantries. The diesel scent from the concrete truck mixed with her overpowering floral perfume in a way that made your nose wrinkle. Sarah looked up from reviewing the foundation plans with her contractor. "Excuse me? Maybe you don't understand how things work here," Karen said, her voice dripping with condescension. "But we have standards in this community." Sarah had dealt with plenty of difficult people in her 25 years on the force. She knew that staying calm and factual usually deflated troublemakers fast. "I've read the covenants thoroughly," Sarah replied evenly. "My barn meets all the requirements." Karen's laugh was sharp, like breaking glass. "We'll see about that." She whipped out some obscure HOA bylaw regarding agricultural structures and threatened Sarah with a $200 a day fine, starting immediately. The nail guns continued to pop in the background as the construction crew worked, completely oblivious to the drama unfolding. Sarah watched Karen stomp back to her white SUV, gravel crunching under those ridiculous heels, and felt something she hadn't experienced in a long time. It wasn't anger. She had learned to control that years ago. It was more like amusement. Karen Mitchell had just made a huge mistake. She assumed Sarah was another suburban housewife she could intimidate. She had no idea that the woman standing in front of that half-built barn had spent decades dealing with people who thought they were above the law. Sarah, meanwhile, was about to give Karen a masterclass in what happens when you pick the wrong target. But first, Karen needed to dig herself in deeper, and, unsurprisingly, she was more than happy to oblige. Karen wasted no time demonstrating exactly how petty power works in suburbia. Within 48 hours, she had called an emergency HOA board meeting. Here's the thing about Karen's board. She controlled 3 of the 5 votes thanks to years of carefully placing her cronies in positions of influence. Democracy at its finest, right? The meeting was scheduled for 2 p.m. on a Wednesday, because, heaven forbid, working people should be able to attend. Karen sat at the head of her dining room table as if she were running a Fortune 500 company, instead of arguing over mailbox colors. "We need to address the agricultural structure situation," Karen announced, shuffling through papers with theatrical importance. Here's where it gets good. She had retroactively changed the definition of agricultural structures in the HOA rules. Suddenly, any structure over 120 square feet required architectural committee approval. Sarah's barn, 1,200 square feet. But it got even better. The architectural committee consisted of Karen and her two closest friends. Meetings were only held during business hours. There was a $500 non-refundable review fee, and they had 45 days to review any application. And, of course, the decision had to be unanimous, giving Karen veto power over everything. It was a beautiful trap, expensive, time-consuming, and designed to make people give up. Sarah showed up at that board meeting with a folder full of printed documents. While Karen continued pontificating about community standards, Sarah quietly stood. "Excuse me," she said, her voice carrying just enough authority to cut through Karen's monologue. "I'd like to read something from State HOA Law, Section 47253A. Karen's smug expression flickered, then hardened into annoyance. This isn't the time for any HOA rule change to affect projects already underway. Any rule change requires 30 days advance notice to all homeowners and cannot impact projects already approved and in progress. Sarah read clearly. She looked around the room. My bond was approved by the county, and construction began before your rule change. This is called retroactive enforcement, and it's illegal. The room went dead silent, except for the tick-tick-tick of Karen's wall clock. One of Karen's board cronies, a nervous man named Dale, shifted uncomfortably. "Is that really the law?" he whispered. Sarah smiled. "Here's the takeaway. Any HOA rule change requires 30-day notice and cannot affect projects already in progress. You can't change the rules in the middle of the game." Karen's face went from pale to bright red. You could practically see the steam rising from her ears. "Legal technicalities," she sputtered. "This is about the spirit of our community, not some loophole." "The law isn't a loophole," Sarah replied calmly. "It's protection against exactly this kind of arbitrary enforcement." Then Karen made her second big mistake. She stood abruptly, her chair scraping across the hardwood floor like nails on a chalkboard, and pointed her perfectly manicured finger at Sarah. "I'm going to make life very difficult for you. You have no idea who you're dealing with." The threat hung in the air like smoke from a bad barbecue. Karen stormed out of her own meeting, her heels clicking against the floor like a machine gun, leaving her board members sitting there like children embarrassed by their mother at the grocery store. But there was one thing Karen didn't notice in her dramatic exit. 3 neighbors had followed Sarah outside. Tom Martinez, a Vietnam veteran with calloused hands and kind eyes, approached first. "I've been waiting 5 years for someone to stand up to her," he said. Betty Wong, a retired teacher with the organizational skills of a librarian, nodded vigorously. "She made us tear down our garden shed last year," she explained. "Said it was visually incompatible with the neighborhood aesthetic. It was behind our house where nobody could even see it." A third neighbor, Jim Peterson, shook his head. "My kids can't even play basketball in our own driveway because she says the noise violates the peaceful enjoyment clause." Sarah listened to their stories and felt something familiar stirring, the same instinct that had made her a good cop. "These weren't just petty disputes," she said. "This was a pattern of abuse, and Karen was the common denominator." "Has anyone documented these incidents?" Sarah asked. The 3 neighbors looked at each other. "Documentation wasn't exactly our strong suit," Jim admitted. Sarah smiled. "Well, I guess we're about to learn together." As they stood there in Karen's pristine driveway, the seeds of something bigger were being planted. Karen thought she'd won this round, but she had actually made the biggest tactical error of her HOA presidency. She had united her victims. If you thought Karen was going to take that legal smackdown lying down, you clearly hadn't met enough HOA presidents. This woman doubled down harder than a Vegas gambler on a losing streak. Every morning, Sarah would find a new violation notice taped to her front door. Apparently, her mailbox was 0.3 inches too close to the sidewalk. Her garbage cans were visible from the street for 12 minutes longer than allowed. Her horse manure pile, which was legally composting behind the barn, was suddenly a public health hazard. Karen called the county 3 times, claiming Sarah was doing unpermitted work. Each time, the inspector showed up, checked Sarah's properly posted permits, and left with an apologetic shrug. At least Karen was keeping county employees busy. Then came the noise complaints. Construction starting at 7 a.m., completely legal, was suddenly disturbing the peace. The police started recognizing Sarah's address on their caller ID. One officer even joked that he should just camp out in her driveway to save gas money. But Karen's masterpiece was calling animal control about unsanitary horse conditions. The inspector arrived, expecting a backyard horror show, and instead found 2 well-fed, healthy horses in a clean pasture with fresh water and premium hay. He spent more time petting the horses than inspecting anything. He told Sarah as he left. Whoever called this in just wasted everyone's time. These are some of the best-kept horses I've seen in this county, the inspector said. The harassment was getting ridiculous, but Sarah had learned a thing or two about dealing with bullies during her police career. While Karen ran around playing gotcha games, Sarah quietly built a case. Every interaction was documented with time-stamped photos. Every conversation was recorded, perfectly legal in their state. Every false complaint became evidence of a harassment pattern. Sarah's kitchen table looked like a detective's caseboard, covered with legal pads and manila folders. But the real breakthrough came when she started researching Karen herself. Turns out, Karen's own property had some interesting issues. Her decorative fence was 2 inches over the property line, a clear boundary violation. Her landscaping blocked fire hydrant access, violating both HOA rules and city ordinances. And that gorgeous stone patio she was so proud of, built without permits and encroaching on the required setback zone. Sarah smiled as she printed out the photographs. Sometimes, the best offense is a good offense. The next time Karen showed up for one of her compliance inspections, clipboard in hand and hostile attitude fully engaged, Sarah was ready. "While you're checking on my bond," Sarah said pleasantly, "I thought you might be interested in some compliance issues I've discovered." Karen's eyebrows shot up. "What are you talking about?" Sarah handed her a manila folder. "Your fence is over the property line by 2 inches. Your landscaping blocks emergency vehicle access. Your patio violates the setback requirements. Oh, and I couldn't help but notice you never got permits for that stonework." Karen's face went through about 5 shades of red as she flipped through the photos and documents. The smell of the horse's fresh hay made her perfectly applied perfume seem even more cloying. This is harassment," Karen sputtered. "No," Sarah said calmly. "This is documentation, just like what you've been doing to me, except my violations are real." She continued, "Here's something every homeowner should know. HOAs lose their enforcement power when they practice selective enforcement. If they ignore violations for some but go after others, the whole system becomes legally invalid. It's called the selective enforcement doctrine, and it's your best friend when dealing with petty tyrants. Equal enforcement or no enforcement at all." Karen realized she was trapped, and trapped people do desperate things. She tried one more power play, pulling out an official-looking document. "I'm finding you $200 per day starting immediately," she announced, her voice trembling slightly. "You have 30 days to demolish that barn or face foreclosure proceedings." Sarah took the document and read it carefully. Then she looked up at Karen with what might have been pity. "You know what, Karen? I think it's time we settle this properly. See you in court." As Karen stumped back to her white SUV, gravel crunching under her designer heels like broken promises, Sarah felt a familiar calm settle over her. She had dealt with plenty of criminals who thought they were smarter than the system. They usually weren't. Karen Mitchell was about to learn what happens when you threaten someone who actually knows the legal system. Soon after, she filed a lawsuit against Sarah for $50,000 in damages, claiming the barn would cause irreparable harm to community property values. The audacity was breathtaking. Karen was suing Sarah for building a completely legal structure on her own property. But here's the kicker: Karen actually got a judge to grant a temporary restraining order. Construction had to stop immediately pending a court hearing. Sarah's workers packed up their tools and left, leaving expensive materials out in the rain while Karen strutted around the neighborhood as if she'd just won the lottery. "I told you I'd make life difficult," Karen smugly told her neighbor Betty Wong, who happened to be getting her mail at the time. Some people need to learn their place. But while Karen celebrated her victory, the neighbors were starting to notice. Tom Martinez mentioned to his wife that Sarah had worked in law enforcement. Betty Wong saw how Sarah had handled all that legal paperwork like a seasoned professional. Word spread that there was more to their new neighbor than met the eye. Sarah spent her evenings at the kitchen table, surrounded by legal pads, researching everything she could find about Karen Mitchell. What she discovered was a pattern that would make any detective's antenna twitch. Karen's real estate license had 2 formal complaints filed against it for misrepresenting property values. She had filed 3 previous lawsuits against other homeowners, losing 2 and settling the third out of court. Property records showed she had bought her house for $380,000 but claimed it was worth $580,000 on insurance documents. The real gold mine, however, was in the county records office. Sarah found the original 1987 HOA covenants, the founding documents that established Willowbrook Estates. Section 12B specifically allowed for equestrian facilities and related agricultural structures. Karen's 2019 amendment directly contradicted the original covenants in HOA law. That was like trying to change the Constitution with a sticky note. Here's a legal nugget that could save you thousands. Always check the original HOA documents at the county records office. Later amendments can't override specific allowances written into the founding covenants. Those original documents are the supreme law of your subdivision. Sarah made copies of everything, had them certified by the county clerk, and began preparing her defense. But Karen wasn't done escalating. The pressure campaign against Sarah's allies began immediately. Tom Martinez got a violation notice about his workshop. Apparently storing tools in your own garage now counted as commercial activity. Betty Wong received a citation for her vegetable garden, deemed agriculturally incompatible with residential zoning. It was textbook retaliation, and it backfired spectacularly. Instead of intimidating Sarah's supporters, Karen had just proved Sarah's point about selective enforcement. Every new violation notice became more evidence for Sarah's case. The courthouse steps were packed on the day of the hearing. Word had spread through the neighborhood that their quiet new resident was taking on the HOA queen, and people were curious to see how it would play out. Karen arrived with an expensive attorney from a downtown firm, briefcase gleaming, confidence radiating from every pore. Sarah walked in carrying a single manila folder and the kind of calm that comes from knowing you're absolutely right. Karen's lawyer presented a polished case about property values and community standards. He had charts, graphs, and expert testimony about visual impact studies. It was impressive, professional, and completely beside the point. When Sarah stood up to respond, something subtle shifted in the room. Her posture straightened, her voice carried the quiet authority she had developed over 25 years of police work, and suddenly, everyone realized they might have underestimated the woman in the simple blue suit. "Your Honor," Sarah began, "I'd like to present the original 1987 covenants for Willowbrook Estates, certified by the county clerk." She placed the documents on the judge's bench with the same care she had once used to present evidence in criminal cases. Section 12B specifically allows for equestrian facilities and related agricultural structures. The defendant's 2019 amendment directly contradicts this founding provision. Under HOA law, specific provisions override general restrictions. The judge reviewed the documents while Karen's expensive lawyer frantically shuffled papers. The courtroom was so quiet you could hear the air conditioning humming. Karen's face had gone from confident to pale, to something approaching panic. Her lawyer whispered something urgent in her ear, but it was too late. The trap had been sprung. The judge looked up from the documents, reading glasses perched on the end of his nose like a school teacher about to deliver a verdict on a failed pop quiz. "Miss Chen, these original covenants are quite clear. The specific allowance for equestrian facilities would indeed override any general restrictions added later." He turned to Karen's lawyer. "Counselor, do you have any response to this?" Karen's attorney looked like he'd rather be anywhere else on earth. "Your Honor, we weren't aware of the specific language in the original documents." "That's interesting," the judge said dryly, "because due diligence would normally include reviewing the founding covenants before filing suit." Then the judge asked a question that changed everything. "Miss Chen, you seem quite familiar with legal procedure. Do you have a background in law?" Sarah stood up straighter, and for the first time in the entire ordeal, let a little of her professional authority show through. "Your Honor, I spent 25 years in law enforcement, retiring as captain of the 14th District in Chicago. I've testified in court hundreds of times and supervised numerous investigations involving property disputes and harassment cases." The courtroom went dead silent. You could practically hear jaws dropping. But Sarah wasn't done. I should also mention that I've recently been hired as the new police chief of Willowbrook, effective in 30 days. If the first revelation was a bomb, this one was a nuclear strike. Karen's face went from pale to ashen to something approaching green. Her lawyer started shuffling papers as if searching for an escape route. The judge's eyebrows shot up. Congratulations on your appointment, Chief Chen. I look forward to working with you in your new capacity. Thank you, Your Honor. The rest of the hearing was essentially a formality. The judge dissolved the restraining order immediately, dismissed Karen's lawsuit with prejudice, meaning she could not refile it, and ordered the HOA to pay Sarah's court costs. But the real victory was watching Karen's entire power structure crumble in real time. Neighbors who had been too afraid to stand up to her suddenly realized they'd been intimidated by someone who now had a very angry police chief living right down the street. Karen managed to croak out something about this not being over as she stumbled toward the exit, but her heart clearly wasn't in it anymore. Her lawyer followed, looking like he was mentally calculating the quickest way to withdraw from representing the HOA. Outside the courthouse, Tom Martinez was the first to reach Sarah. Chief, we had no idea. Betty Wong was practically bouncing with excitement. Karen had picked the wrong person to mess with. A small crowd of neighbors had gathered, and Sarah could see the mixture of relief and vindication on their faces. These were people who had lived under Karen's thumb for years. Suddenly, they realized the cavalry had arrived. But Sarah handled it exactly as a good police chief should. No gloating, no threats, just quiet professionalism. I just want to finish my bond and live peacefully with my neighbors, she said. That's all I've ever wanted. As word spread through Willowbrook Estates that afternoon, you could almost feel the shift in power. Karen Mitchell was no longer the untouchable HOA queen. She was just another resident who had made the mistake of harassing a police chief. And Sarah still had a bond to finish. Construction resumed the next morning with renewed energy. Sarah's contractors showed up like they were building something historic, not just a horse barn. The sounds of hammers and power tools echoed across the neighborhood like a victory song. Karen was nowhere to be seen for 3 days straight. Her white SUV stayed parked in her driveway while the rest of Willowbrook Estates buzzed with the news that their new police chief had just legally demolished the HOA president in open court. By Thursday evening, Tom Martinez knocked on Sarah's door with a 6-pack of beer and a proposition. "Chief," he said, "I think it's time we had a neighborhood meeting." They gathered in Tom's workshop that weekend after 7 p.m. Neighbors who had finally found the courage to stand up to Karen's reign of terror were there. Betty Wong arrived with a folder thick enough to choke a horse, filled with documentation of Karen's past violations and selective enforcement. She made the Hendersons repaint their house because the beige wasn't the right shade, Betty said, spreading photos across Tom's workbench. But her own shutters are 3 shades off the approved color palette. Jim Peterson, the father with basketball-playing kids, shared his own horror story. She cited me for excessive recreational noise because my 10-year-old was bouncing a ball at 4 p.m. on a Saturday. Meanwhile, her landscaping crew runs leaf blowers at 7 a.m. every Tuesday. Sarah listened, feeling that familiar detective instinct kicking in. This wasn't just petty tyranny, it was a systematic pattern of abuse that had been going on for years. "Here's something everyone should understand," Sarah said, pulling out a legal pad. "Most HOA fines are actually unenforceable if they aren't properly assessed according to your covenants and state law." She explained how HOA boards must follow basic corporate governance rules, proper notice, documented violations, and fair hearings. Skip these steps, and the fines are essentially worthless threats. The takeaway: HOAs have power, but only within strict legal boundaries defined by your state's corporate laws. Understanding this could save homeowners thousands. Tom's contractor friend added an even juicier revelation. "Karen tried to shake me down for a kickback last year," he said. "Claimed I needed to pay a neighborhood improvement fee to work in the subdivision. When I refused, suddenly my permit application started getting delayed." Betty Wong's accountant neighbor had quietly analyzed the HOA's financial statements, and what he found was disturbing. $23,000 in administrative expenses over the past 2 years with no supporting documentation. That wasn't accounting. That was embezzlement. Sarah recognized the pattern immediately. In her police career, she had seen plenty of small-scale corruption cases start exactly like this. Someone gets a little power, starts bending rules, and eventually convinces themselves they deserve special compensation for their hard work. While the neighbors planned their HOA revolution, Karen was apparently plotting her own counterattack. Witnesses reported seeing her meeting with a city council member at the local coffee shop, heads bent together in intense conversation. She had also hired a private investigator, a rumpled man asking questions about Sarah's background. The rumors Karen spread were growing increasingly desperate. Outside agitators, she called them. Chicago corruption coming to our peaceful community. It was the last refuge of someone watching their power slip away. But Sarah had bigger things on her mind. In 3 weeks, she'd officially become police chief, and she spent her days meeting with the outgoing chief and reviewing department protocols. She made it crystal clear that her personal dispute with the HOA would never interfere with her professional duty. "We handle this as private citizens," she told Tom and Betty. "My badge doesn't get involved unless someone breaks the law." The community organization was happening naturally. They'd started a group chat, carefully excluding Karen's remaining allies, and residents were sharing their own Karen horror stories. The woman had been so busy terrorizing everyone that she had accidentally created her own opposition movement. Betty Wong stepped up as their unofficial coordinator. Her teacher instincts were perfect for organizing people and paperwork. They needed 25% of homeowners to call a special election and remove Karen from the board. Current count, 31%, and growing. Sarah's barn was nearly finished now, the red roof visible from half the neighborhood. Every morning, she stood with her coffee, watching her horses graze peacefully in the pasture, reflecting on how sometimes the best revenge is just living well. But she had a feeling Karen wasn't going to go quietly. Desperate people do desperate things, and Karen Mitchell was getting more desperate by the day. What started as petty harassment was about to cross serious legal lines. Sarah discovered the first escalation on a Tuesday morning when she went out to feed her horses. Scattered across her gravel driveway were dozens of roofing nails, strategically placed where her truck tires would hit them. Lucky for her, she spotted the glint of metal in the early morning sun before driving over them. Her security cameras, installed after the harassment began, caught everything. Karen's white SUV creeping down the lane at 3:47 a.m., a figure in dark clothing scattering the nails, then speeding away. The license plate was crystal clear in the infrared footage. But Karen wasn't done. She had apparently discovered the wonders of anonymous complaints to state agencies. Sarah began receiving calls from the state police about reports of an unlicensed officer impersonating law enforcement. Each call required her to fax over her credentials and certifications, wasting hours of everyone's time. Karen also tried to rally the city council against Sarah's police chief appointment, showing up at meetings with a petition claiming Sarah was unfit for community leadership due to ongoing legal disputes. The petition had exactly 7 signatures, 3 of which were Karen's own name written in slightly different ways. The smear campaign went digital, too. Fake social media accounts started popping up with names like concerned_Willowbrook_resident and community_safety_first, all posting about the corrupt Chicago cop trying to take over their town. The writing style was unmistakably Karen's. She had this annoying habit of putting quotation marks around words for emphasis that made the posts almost laughable. Local Facebook groups became battlegrounds. Karen posted inflammatory comments about Sarah's suspicious past and questionable motives, while Sarah's growing group of supporters countered with facts and legal citations. It was like watching a chess match between a grandmaster and someone who had just learned how the pieces moved. The financial pressure was mounting as well. Tom Martinez's contractor friend revealed that Karen owed him $15,000 for work on her patio. Betty Wong discovered through public records that Karen's real estate license was under formal review by the state board, and her property taxes on the McMansion were 3 months behind. Then Karen made her biggest mistake yet. She showed up at Sarah's door on a Friday evening, all smiles and fake friendliness, acting as if nothing had ever happened. The smell of her overpowering perfume mixed with the evening scent of honeysuckle along Sarah's fence line. "Sarah," she said, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness, "I think we got off on the wrong foot. Maybe we can work something out." Sarah leaned against her doorframe, curious to see where this was going. "I've been thinking," Karen continued, "you could be very comfortable here in Willowbrook. Very comfortable. Maybe even find yourself in a nice position on the HOA board. We could use someone with your background." The implication hung in the air like smoke from a grease fire. Karen was actually trying to bribe her way out of this mess. "Are you attempting to bribe a police officer?" Sarah asked, her voice shifting into that flat, professional tone every cop learns when things get serious. Karen's fake smile flickered. "I'm not. I'm just suggesting we could all benefit from cooperation." "You should leave," Sarah said. "Now." That weekend, the neighborhood rallied like never before. Tom Martinez hosted a barbecue that was officially just a casual get-together but felt more like a campaign event. 23 families showed up, with only 3 declining, Karen's last remaining allies. Sarah kept a low profile, flipping burgers and listening as neighbors shared their Karen horror stories. But when Karen showed up uninvited, attorney in tow, the mood shifted fast. "This is an illegal conspiracy," Karen shrieked, pointing at the gathered families as if identifying suspects in a lineup. "You're all conspiring to destroy my reputation." Her lawyer looked like he wanted to disappear into the ground. "Mrs. Mitchell, perhaps we should go," he said quietly. But Karen was past listening to reason. "I'll sue every one of you. I'll make your lives miserable. You have no idea what I'm capable of." Tom Martinez's security cameras captured every word of the meltdown. By Sunday morning, Karen's lawyer had officially withdrawn from representing her. The point of no return had been crossed. When someone's world crumbles around them, they either accept reality or double down on crazy. Guess which option Karen chose? Her final gambit started with a call to the state attorney general's office. She filed a formal complaint claiming Sarah was abusing police authority before even taking office, using her position to intimidate honest citizens. The irony was thick enough to cut with a butter knife. Karen also contacted Channel 7 News with a sob story about being discriminated against and harassed by a corrupt officer. The reporter probably expected a juicy police corruption scandal and instead got a rambling 40-minute rant about bond construction and property values. But Karen's masterpiece, the move that would finally seal her fate, came at 5:47 a.m. on a Tuesday morning. Sarah was out doing her usual morning routine, filling water troughs and tossing hay to her horses. The smell of fresh coffee drifted from her kitchen window while the early morning mist rolled across the pasture like a peaceful dream. Then she heard the sirens. Vehicles were coming fast, the sound echoing off the trees like thunder in a canyon. Sarah looked up to see a SWAT van screaming down her lane, followed by 3 patrol cars, red and blue lights painting everything in strobing colors. Her horses snorted nervously and backed away from the fence as a tactical team poured out of their vehicles, weapons drawn, shouting commands. "Drop what you're doing. Hands where we can see them." Sarah set down the hay bale slowly, raised her hands, and stood perfectly still. Years of training had taught her exactly how to handle situations like this, even when she was on the wrong end of it. "I'm Sarah Chen," she called out clearly. "I'm unarmed, and I'm the incoming police chief for this jurisdiction." The team leader, a sergeant she actually recognized from regional police conferences, lowered his weapon and signaled his team to stand down. "Chief Chen, what the hell are you doing here?" he asked. "I live here," Sarah said calmly. "This is my property. What's this about?" "We got a call about an armed suspect threatening neighbors. Anonymous tip said you were armed and making threats about shooting people." Sarah almost laughed. "Almost. Sergeant Morrison, right? We met at the tactical conference in Springfield last year. I think someone's been playing games with your dispatch." While the SWAT team was sorting out the fact that they'd been sent on a wild goose chase, Sarah's security cameras were recording everything. The 911 call would be traced back through cell tower data within hours. Karen had used a burner phone, but she'd been sloppy, purchasing it on her credit card at a store with security cameras. The investigation moved fast once the police realized they'd been used as weapons in a neighborhood dispute. The burner phone purchase was caught on surveillance footage at the electronics store. Karen's car was spotted on traffic cameras near the cell tower that pinged during the call. By noon, local news had picked up the story. SWAT team called the future police chief's home in a false report. By evening, it had gone viral on social media with the hashtag #SWAT Teams Chief. Karen tried to control the narrative, posting frantically on Facebook about being the real victim and claiming Sarah had somehow orchestrated the whole thing to make her look bad. Her explanation made about as much sense as a screen door on a submarine. When Channel 7 finally tracked Karen down for an interview, she melted down on camera like an ice cream cone in August. Standing in her perfectly manicured driveway, she ranted about outside agitators and Chicago corruption while the reporter asked increasingly pointed questions about the false police report. "I'm the victim here," Karen shrieked, her voice hitting frequencies that probably hurt dogs 3 blocks away. "She's destroying our peaceful community. Someone had to take action." That soundbite played on every news station in the state. The legal consequences came down like an avalanche. False police report charges were filed within 24 hours. The state launched an investigation into the HOA's missing funds. Karen's real estate license was officially suspended pending a fraud investigation. But it was the community response that truly sealed her fate. 47 of the 52 homeowners in Willowbrook Estates signed a petition supporting Sarah and demanding Karen's immediate removal from any HOA position. Her remaining 3 allies quietly distanced themselves once the criminal charges were announced. Sarah's barn was finally completed that week, the red roof gleaming in the afternoon sun as her horses settled into their new home. The local newspaper ran a feature story about the barn that broke the HOA, complete with photos of Sarah's peaceful horses and quotes from grateful neighbors. The irony was perfect. Karen's desperate attempt to humiliate Sarah had instead made her a local hero and turned Karen into a national laughingstock. Sometimes, justice has a sense of humor. The emergency HOA meeting was scheduled for the community center because, frankly, nobody wanted to set foot in Karen's house anymore. What was supposed to be a routine gathering turned into the most attended HOA meeting in Willowbrook Estates history. 64 people crammed into a room designed for 50. Folding chairs were dragged in from the kitchen. People stood along the walls, and someone had to open the windows because the air conditioning couldn't keep up. The smell of too many people in too small a space mixed with the lingering aroma of the senior center's morning coffee social. Local news cameras were set up in the back corner. Channel 7 wasn't about to miss the sequel to their viral SWAT story. The county supervisor showed up as an observer, which was political speak for, "I want to see this train wreck in person." Karen arrived fashionably late, flanked by yet another new attorney, apparently the 4th one she'd hired since this whole mess started. She wore her most expensive suit and carried herself like she was walking into a boardroom instead of her own public execution. "This meeting is an illegal coup against rightful authority," she announced before even sitting down. "I am the duly elected president of this HOA, and I demand reinstatement." Tom Martinez, now serving as interim president, looked up from his notes with the patience of a man who had dealt with far worse in Vietnam. "Karen, you're welcome to address the meeting during public comment, but you're no longer running this show." The evidence presentation was methodical and devastating. Betty Wong, armed with her teacher's organizational skills and 3-ring binders, laid out Karen's violations with PowerPoint precision. The selective enforcement, the financial irregularities, the harassment campaign, all documented with timestamps and photographs. Tom Martinez showed video footage of Karen's meltdowns, including her greatest hits from the barbecue incident and the Channel 7 interview. Watching Karen threaten an entire neighborhood on the big screen was somehow even more cringeworthy the second time around. When they got to the financials, the room went dead quiet. $23,000 in unexplained administrative expenses, invoices for services never rendered, payments to Karen's own real estate company for property management that wasn't in her job description. "This isn't just poor bookkeeping," Betty explained. "This is potential embezzlement." Then Sarah was asked to address the meeting. She stood up slowly, and you could feel the energy in the room shift. Here was the woman who had taken on the HOA Queen and won, the future police chief who'd been swatted for building a barn. "I moved to Willowbrook because I wanted peace," Sarah said, her voice carrying clearly to the back of the room. "I wanted a place to heal after losing my husband. Somewhere my horses could be happy. Somewhere I could be a good neighbor." She looked directly at Karen. "I never wanted a fight. I just wanted to build a barn for my horses." The room was so quiet you could hear the fluorescent lights humming overhead. But sometimes bullies force your hand. Sometimes you have to stand up, not just for yourself, but for everyone who can't fight back. The crowd erupted in applause that lasted nearly a minute. That's when the county supervisor stood up. The room fell silent again, everyone sensing something significant was about to happen. "I have an announcement," he said, adjusting his glasses like a judge about to deliver a verdict. "As of this morning, The Willowbrook Estates HOA has lost its corporate standing with the state due to failure to file required documents and financial irregularities. Karen's face went from red to white to green in about 3 seconds. Furthermore, the supervisor continued, the $23,000 in missing funds is now under criminal investigation by the district attorney's office. Mrs. Mitchell no longer has any legal authority as HOA president. That was Karen's cue for her final performance. She shot to her feet like she'd been launched from a catapult, pointing accusingly at Sarah and screaming about outside agitators, corrupt cops, and conspiracies to destroy honest citizens. But here's the thing about meltdowns. They only work if the audience doesn't know you're completely wrong about everything. This crowd had just heard 40 minutes of documented evidence about Karen's behavior. Her tantrum looked less like righteous anger and more like a toddler being told she couldn't have ice cream for dinner. This is all her fault. Karen shrieked, jabbing her finger at Sarah. She's not even from here. She's destroying our community with her Chicago corruption. Then came the mic drop moment. Sarah stood up, walked calmly to the front of the room, and said in her clear, professional voice, Karen, you called SWAT on a police officer for feeding her horses. Maybe it's time to ask yourself, who's really destroying this community? The room erupted. Karen stormed out, her new attorney following like a man fleeing a burning building. 6 months later, Sarah Chen stood in her completed barn, watching the late afternoon sun filter through the open doors. Her horses, Ranger and Belle, munched contentedly on their hay while the sound of children's laughter drifted across the pasture from the neighborhood playground. As Willowbrook's police chief, Sarah had settled into her role beautifully. Crime was down 23%. Community relations had never been better, and she had started a neighborhood watch program that actually brought people together instead of dividing them. Tom Martinez ran it with military precision, and even the teenagers respected him. Karen Mitchell, well, that was a story with its own poetic justice. She had pleaded guilty to filing a false police report, a misdemeanor that came with 200 hours of community service and a $5,000 fine. The irony wasn't lost on anyone that she was now picking up trash along the very roads she had once terrorized. Her real estate license was permanently revoked after the state board found evidence of fraud and misrepresentation. The missing HOA funds investigation had resulted in civil charges and a court order to repay every penny plus interest. Karen's McMansion quietly went up for sale 3 months ago, and word through the neighborhood grapevine was that she had taken a job at a call center 2 counties over. But the real transformation was in the community itself. Neighbors who had once lived in fear now shared trust and camaraderie. HOA meetings became forums for collaboration rather than intimidation. Willowbrook Estates had learned that standing up to bullies, documenting the facts, and working together could completely turn the tide. And Sarah, finally at peace, could enjoy the simple pleasure of her horses grazing in the sun, the community thriving around her, and the knowledge that justice, sometimes slow, sometimes funny, always inevitable, had been served. The new HOA board, led by Tom Martinez as president and Betty Wong as secretary-treasurer, focused on actual improvements instead of petty enforcement. They organized a neighborhood watch, started a community garden, and even installed new playground equipment with funds that had previously gone to Karen's administrative expenses. Sarah's barn had become something of a local landmark. Beautiful Barns magazine featured it in their spring issue, complete with a sidebar about standing up to HOA overreach. The article generated speaking requests that Sarah politely declined, though she did donate the fees to a cause close to her heart. The Sarah Chen Police Academy Scholarship was announced at the spring town hall meeting, funded entirely by the unexpected income from her viral story. I want kids to understand that being a police officer means serving your community, Sarah explained to the packed auditorium. It means standing up for people who can't stand up for themselves. The first recipient was Marcus Thompson, a local high school senior, who wrote in his essay, I want to help people like Chief Chen help our neighborhood. Sometimes the real criminals wear suits and carry clipboards. The annual barn dance had become Willowbrook's signature event. What started as Sarah's idea for a community fundraiser had turned into a county-wide celebration. Local bands played on a stage set up between the barn and the pasture. Food trucks lined the lane, and families spread blankets on the grass for the best view of the sunset. Standing there watching her neighbors enjoy themselves, Sarah felt a peace she hadn't experienced since before her husband died. The smell of barbecue mixed with fresh hay. Kids petted Ranger and Belle under careful supervision, while teenagers danced badly to country music and their parents pretended not to watch. "Chief!" Betty Wong called out, approaching with a letter in her hand. "You're going to love this." It was from the police chief in Karen's new town, 2 counties over. Apparently, Karen had already filed 3 complaints with their HOA about unsuitable residents and declining property standards. The letter was a friendly heads-up from one chief to another. Sarah chuckled and folded the letter. Some people never learn. "Should we warn them?" Betty asked. "I already did," Sarah replied. "Sent the new chief a copy of our case file with a note that said, 'Heads up, this one's trouble.'" As the sun set behind the trees and string lights flickered on between the barn and the house, Sarah realized that sometimes the best revenge really is just living well. Her horses were healthy and happy, her community was thriving, and she was doing work that mattered. But it didn't hurt that the bully got exactly what she deserved.